Hi everybody, and welcome to another watercolor tutorial. Today we are going to be using a marker to create a watercolor effect. So if all you have is a marker, then you're in luck. If you do have watercolors, this will definitely help create a nice background effect. So let's just get right into the tutorial. I started out by using a rectangular piece of paper and just taping the borders so that my painting would be, or the edges would be nice and straight in my painting. And then I took a little bit of black mixed with just a hint of blue and created a jagged line about 2/3 down my piece of paper, making sure that it was still kind of horizontal. And then I just dragged out that color using mostly water to the top of the page to just fill it completely, the top 2/3, creating sort of a sky. I added a little bit more pigment to that line, making sure that the background was still wet so that the color would blend in and nicely disperse. And I added a little bit of color in the top portion as well to emulate clouds, because we want this background to look like a dark, cloudy day. Once your background has completely dried, and this is very important, otherwise this next step will not turn out very nicely because the ink will bleed, you're going to take your fine tip marker and start drawing on the details. You don't necessarily need a fine tip marker, but it will definitely help you to achieve the detail that we are going for here. So the first thing that I'm doing, at least, is just creating a few really thin trees that don't have any leaves on either side of my piece of paper, just starting from that horizontal jaggedy line that we painted earlier. And then once I was happy with those, I started to draw on my birch trees. So because birch trees tend to be mostly white, you don't really want to paint a solid black line on both sides of the tree. So maybe just paint one side, just so that, or not, I keep saying paint, but you're going to draw one side just so you have a guide. But then the second side of the tree you can draw using sort of a line that hasn't been completely filled in. And then we're going to be using the same techniques that we would in a watercolor painting. So you are welcome to check out my watercolor birch tree tutorial that I released a while ago, if you want a little bit more watercolor instruction here. But you're just going to draw these trees with a little bit of, black diagonal lines, some branches coming off of them. Some portions can be a little bit darker than others with, little lines and blobs here and there. You're basically just making it look like a very rough, cartoony shape of a birch tree. You can even add a few blades of grass, as I'm doing here. And once you are happy with that, we're going to now do the fun part, or paint the fun part. So you're going to take a thinner brush and you're going to dip it in water, making sure that it's not too wet. And then you're just going to paint over the parts of the tree that you want to blend a little bit. So by doing this, we are activating the ink from our fine tip marker, and it creates sort of this watercolor illusion. So just make sure that you're not painting the entire tree or going over the entire tree, because you will cause all of the ink from that tree to activate, and it will basically just be one giant blob of ink. And that's not what we want, because birch trees tend to be white. And you also want to dip and rinse, not rinse, but kind of dip your brush into water in between strokes, just to make sure that you're not carrying excess ink from one portion of your tree to another. And you can even have a little piece of cloth or just a paper towel handy to take off some of that excess water. And then the final thing that I want to say when you're doing this portion is to make sure that you are painting within the lines, because if you activate that ink outside of the line, it's going to bleed outside of the tree and kind of ruin the effect. You can also add some shadows to your grass and any other portions of your painting. I activated some of the ink of those little leafless trees that I painted earlier. You don't have to do that. If I painted this painting again, I probably wouldn't do it because I didn't really like how it looked, but it's completely up to you. Don't forget to peel the tape off if you applied it at the beginning, and you're left with a beautiful watercolor-like design using a marker. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in next week's tutorial.